No, I don't think you can morally control Kris in the events of Deltarune, but I still want to talk about it and just kind of talk about this idea of the player's relationship with Kris. Video games as a whole are designed with the idea that the player is going to be interacting with the world, and the events and story and even character builds happen with the player's influence. It's not going to happen otherwise. If you fall asleep on the couch, nothing's going to happen. Versus a TV show or a movie, things will proceed as they were written and continue on. Undertale and Deltarune both commentate on a certain aspect of these video games. Undertale focusing more on the idea of the save system and what resetting can look like for the characters in this world, and Deltarune focusing on thinking about the player's relationship with the character they are controlling. And of course, while that's the main focus of both, I think we can still think about player input in both of these games. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. And to do that, I want to compare the situations of our two protagonists, Frisk and Kris. And I know I'm going to mess them up at some point during this. I'm going to switch one or the other, and we're going to just go with it. But hey. Frisk's scenario is that they are a child that fell down into the underground. How was the fall? Is in this whole new world. They don't have any allies at the start of the game, and they are trying to get out is the idea. Versus Kris, where they have a fully established life before the events of Deltarune, the video game. See, Kris has all of these relationships with other characters in town. Their parents are going through a divorce. They have a brother that's off at college, and all of these pieces happen before the events of the game itself. Versus Frisk, where we don't know anything about their time before the underground. And I think also part of it comes down to the age of these protagonists. Frisk is roughly 10 to 12, and Kris is roughly 14 to 17. And I think these are important for the discussion of player input. Frisk, being younger and a child, is more likely to listen to an authority figure, as well as the environment that they were put in. Being put into the underground with no allies, of course it's easier to listen to some ambiguous voice from the void influencing their action because they're a scared child. We don't see a lot of the emotion that Frisk communicates, but we know that they're still their own character, specifically with the introduction of their name. Us, the player, can put in a name at the start of Undertale, but that's not our name. That's the name of the first fallen child, and the child we are controlling through the events of the game is Frisk, and it's revealed in the true pacifist ending that that's who it is. Their name is Frisk. We didn't decide that. That's just a fact that's put in the game, and it's when Asriel asks for their name that they say, "Hey, I'm Frisk." It's one of the few times that we see Frisk interact without our player input. But I think that has a lot to do with just the fact that they are a scared child. Us, as this sort of voice of authority, is going to listen to us because they're in this completely new world. And that even goes and extends towards the two main routes of pacifist and the genocide route. Because if we, the player, are telling Frisk, "Hey man, these monsters need to be empathized with," or "these monsters are a danger," they're going to listen because that's what we're telling them. There's still not as much of a discussion of Undertale with the player input side, but it is there. Although very minor, it is a part of the game. Versus Kris. Kris has a whole identity established before the events of the game and what us, the players, see. And we are dripped little pieces as we go on. And while we, the player, are making the majority of the choices, there are aspects where Kris does manage to do things on their own. Of course, we mostly see this in the less moral answers when it comes to dialogue. Some that stick out when Ralze is talking about himself experiencing feelings and asking if it's okay. If we say no, it's not okay, Kris will cut themselves off, putting a hand over their mouth so that it is still telling Ralse, hey, it's okay to feel. When Susie asks in the church, hey, Kris, will you ever play piano again? And we say, hey, I'll never play piano again. Kris goes to the point of self-harm to not say that answer. And Susie is still left shocked at whatever they may be feeling, to the point that they would bite their hand that badly. But it's still an aspect of this. But of course, Kris is not fully in control, and we see that in the case of the Snowgrave route. While we cannot kill any of the entities in the Dark World naturally, when Noelle exists in the party, we the player are taking advantage of the fact that Kris has this established relationship with Noelle and commanding her to do all of these heinous acts. And it becomes extremely heartbreaking when we get to chapter 4, and it is not Kris that is pushing Noelle to continue on with the Thorn Ring. It is us, the player. Now, of course, that's the less moral actions. So, is it okay if we're doing all the moral things? Would Kris be happy with us if we are pacifying every enemy and doing all of these good things? No. We've taken away their agency. They aren't the one making choices. I think a good example of this is that we are doing stuff outside of Kris's norm. Fundamentally, there is nothing wrong with saying hi to your neighbors, checking in on a friend's father that's at the hospital. That's not wrong. But we are going against the grain of what Kris usually does. And obviously, Kris usually isn't going to the Dark World. But that's not about that. We're talking about the simple actions. And we even see that when Kris speaks the dialogue that we choose, it's truly not their voice. We see in the Snowgrave route that Noelle even talks about, hey, your voice, your naturally mumbly voice was there when you met me the other night and told me everything was a dream, versus otherwise where it seemingly seems more distant and more cold even when us the player are making these harsh commands. And I think there's a lot of interesting things when it comes to that. And I want to talk about specifically one scene that, because ultimately Kris has lost their self-input, their self-identity as we the player are controlling their actions, there's one scene that ultimately is kind of a small little thing, but the more I thought about it, there are so many ways you could read this, and that is through Tenna's quiz game. You see, if you're going through the game, you can find out aspects of the Dreamer family, but you don't know everything. So when we get to Tenna's quiz game and Tenna asks who is Asriel's favorite character in the Smash Bros. Ripoff, Kris will cough and move to the right answer. And we could read this so many different ways, I feel like. There becomes a certain point where it's like, okay, is Kris doing this to help us? Is Kris trying to appease us? Is Kris doing this out of fear even? Because it's like, okay, this soul wants to win, and I'm just going to appease them and say, yep, this is the right answer. Maybe it's them fighting for that little bit of self-identity and their established relationships. Through the course of the game, we haven't met Asriel yet, but Kris probably feels some sort of connection where it's like, Asriel, my bond with my brother is the only thing that has not been tainted by the player. The player has not interacted with him, and I want to value the simple likes and dislikes that he has. And even we see another cough moment when it asks what Kris's favorite food is, because they are trying to hold on to that little bit of self-identity they can preserve while someone else is piloting their body. and it's a terrifying moment to be in that situation. There comes all sorts of questions about piloting this body, especially in like chapters 3 and 4, where in chapter 4, one of the few times that we see our soul detached from Kris while the game is still going. Between the events of chapters 1 and 2, of course, our soul is detached, but we don't see what Kris is up to. But in chapter 4, when we're in the holiday house, we see that Kris is getting chocolate milk while on the phone. Of course, the phone call becomes a whole thing of who are they talking to, what's their goals, and stuff like that. But getting chocolate milk, that's probably one of the first actions that they've been able to do just for themselves at that point. It's not... There comes a question of, hey, is this an idea of like self-preservation? Like, are we feeding them enough? Which becomes a whole other disgusting can of worms. Am I feeding the character I'm controlling enough? Because there's no health bars to indicate it. We don't know that. Of course, their health may be maxed, but there's no hunger bar. Are we doing the right thing? But specifically with a treat like chocolate milk, that is just a treat, fundamentally. It's not like Kris is trying to nourish themselves to just have like specifically like what they need for their body to function. They could have got water, you know, but they got chocolate milk because it's fun and it's a part of themselves that they want. We see in between the events of chapter 1 and 2, when Kris removes the soul, what do? They get pie. They get pie because it's their favorite food and they want a slice. It becomes so tragic that in these brief moments where they are detached from us, the player, they seem to indulge in the little pieces that they want themselves. Of course, that's just what we're given. It's heartbreaking that we're controlling this character. Now, of course, when it comes to player input, I do think I need to talk a little bit about fandom discussion. When it comes to a game discussing about the character's interaction with us, the player, I do think it's important if we talk about the events that happen outside of the game. And that's honestly part of the reason why I want to even talk about this at all, is specifically when it comes to Kris's gender identity. Kris is non-binary and uses they them pronouns. So is Frisk. But it's interesting that there were some folks, and this is not to say a majority or anything specific, but there are some folks that were specifically using the wrong pronouns for Kris, which is ironic because part of what the game is trying to say is that us, the player, take a certain aspect of Kris's identity and self-agency away when we are controlling them. So to take away their gender identity and not use the right pronouns just kind of falls directly into that discussion. They talk about like headcanon. That was some of the discussion, and it was like, oh, it's my headcanon that they use different pronouns. Buddy, headcanons are for stuff that's not established, okay? You know, there is no concrete proof that a lot of characters in media are or aren't trans. I can headcanon that a lot of them are for fun, but I'm still going to value the pronouns that are used for the character on screen because that's established, you know? And that's kind of the difference when it comes to those things. And yeah, that's that. But I do think it's interesting, this discussion of, oh, changing the pronouns that Kris uses does kind of go further into the discussion. Obviously, non-binary folks in general, I hate to say it, but it's true, aren't really respected. And I'm sure any non-binary person would nod their head and be like, yeah. And usually, passing by folks will default to however that person is presenting, whether it be more masculine or more feminine, just because we as a society have gendered so many traits that really can apply to anyone on any side or spot in the gender spectrum. But it's interesting that folks were trying to argue a reason to use different pronouns for Kris, because it's like a part of the game is talking about like respecting the player that you're controlling and taking away this self-agency and their identity. So to use different ones fully goes into that. And of course there's a lot of discussion on if it's even ethical, or there'd be different comments where it'd be like, oh, haha, Kris is okay with me, you know? Kris is not okay with you. Like, I get it, and you want to feel like you are a good person, but the story being told is that you are a foreign entity controlling their body. And even in a full pacifist route, Kris is still working against you. And we can see that in chapter 4, when we are trying to get to Dez's guitar so that we can find the code for the bunker. Kris stops you because Kris has other motives, other ideas. We don't know them right now because the game's not finished, but they use a hockey stick to move you out of the way so that you don't find the code or alert anyone to you being there. Like, that's kind of the point. Even on a good route, that's what's going to happen to you. This animosity between the two of them. And that's okay. Like, that's part of the story being told. When you are controlling the player of Kris, that is to be expected because we, the player, are playing a game. But the story is trying to talk about what that would do to a character. And that's what we see in the events of Deltarune, in both a pacifist route and a Snowgrave / weird route. And the game wants to talk about that. And I think that ultimately comes down to just the idea that Deltarune supposedly is going to have one ending. I'll put a screenshot up of it here, but on the Steam page, there seems to be a question about it. Oh, there's only one ending. But I think if there is only going to be one ending, it has more to do with that the ending is going to be in Kris's hands. We, the player, are not going to get to decide the ending because that's not what this game is about. The game is talking about how we don't have options. That's the first thing the game does. You create a character and are immediately told you don't get a choice because it wants you to think about Kris not having a choice and no agency. And yeah, I think that's everything I want to talk about. Of course, I'd love to hear y'all's input. You can tell me I'm wrong, and that's okay. By all means, feel free to tell me I'm wrong and let me know in the comments, because I think there can be a lot of discussion. There's aspects of the game I didn't even talk about that could definitely be pointed to. Like, it's so great. I love a game that makes me think and makes me go, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching. If you like it, leave a like. And if you want to talk about it in the comments, I will definitely be keeping an eye out so I can see what other folks think. I have a script I wrote for a Metaphor video. I love RPGs in general, and Metaphor ReFantazio was a really, really good game. And I have a script fully written for that. I think I'm going to tweak it, but I'm going to put that out sometime soon. So if you want to watch a video I made about Metaphor ReFantazio, click subscribe and it'll show up eventually. But also don't rush me because I work a 9 to 5. Have a great day. Thank you.